Chapter 11. Sarah's mouth curved in a faint, curiously mocking smile. So we're not moving toward hell, huh? Then why do you look at me as though I might have been spawned there? Sarah. Oh, don't worry about it, Tucker. I'm not evil. I'm just not normal. He knew she had deliberately reached into his head and his nightmares in order to keep him at a distance. As coolly as any surgeon, she had slipped her scalpel into him with full knowledge of the effect it would cause. And now she studied him with calm assessment, her eyes distant. This was what he got for pushing her. Sarah was pushing back, and she was a lot stronger than either of them had given her credit for. I don't believe you're evil and normal is what you get used to, he managed. Right. He watched her move away from the window toward the doorway to the bedroom and made no effort to stop her. He wanted to. He wanted to call her back or go after her, to try to close the very real distance between them, but he couldn't. Sarah had discovered his Achilles heel, and if only to protect herself when he pushed and keep him out, she had learned how to use the knowledge against him. Until he could bring himself to face his demons, he had no defense against that tactic. She paused at the door and looked back at him. As if nothing had happened, she said, "The psychic we're going to try to approach tomorrow, what did you say his name was?" "Mason," Tucker replied automatically. "Neil Mason." She nodded. "Good night, Tucker." "Good night, Sarah." Patty Loa looked out her kitchen window for the fourth time in half an hour, just to reassure herself that Brandon was still out there, playing in the sandbox with his dinosaurs, safe in their fenced backyard. He was, and she stood there for a few moments watching him before returning to her baking. It wasn't like her to be a nervous mother, but this was the third morning in a row that her 5-year-old had awakened, asking her anxiously if they could hide from the bad men. Adam thought she was crazy, but Patty was convinced that Brandon had a special gift. He had always been an intensely sensitive child, filled with wordless terrors and worries, but now that his language skills were better developed, he was able to communicate his thoughts and fears more clearly than he had as an anxious toddler. Poor little Brandon was frequently afraid. He didn't like the dark, or closets, or scary movies, and there was one place in the upstairs hallway of their old house that upset him terribly. "There's a lady, Mommy. She keeps crying." That was all Patty could get out of him. She'd never believed in ghosts, but now she gave that particular spot a wide berth. Brandon had also startled her more than once by carrying on casual conversations with the people. The people were not apparently connected to this house, since he talked to them on the playground and at his cousin's house, and even at the Atlanta church where she took him to Sunday school. And they didn't seem to be threatening people, since Brandon displayed no anxiety at all about them. But the flesh and blood people around him were beginning to notice. Her sister had made a remark just the other day about Brandon and his imaginary friends, and some of his little friends were beginning to tease him. Brandon, always a shy child with a mostly solitary nature, was becoming reluctant to get out of sight of his mother. Adam said she was spoiling him, catering to his childish fears and overactive imagination by sticking close to him, but Patty didn't care. She was worried. Brandon was convinced that the bad men were coming to take him away, and it frightened him so much that it frightened her even more. He could never tell her who these bad men were, or even what they looked like, and since Patty's questions had only upset him further, she'd stopped asking. Just bad men was all he knew or could say. Bad men in the dark. That thought sent Patty back to the window, and as soon as she looked out, her throat closed up and shards of ice stabbed at her heart. Brandon? She rushed out the back door, staring at the empty sandbox, and then looking wildly around the backyard. The gate was still closed. She could see the lock still fastened, but Brandon was nowhere to be seen. Brandon! Sarah gazed out the car window and murmured, "A nice, normal little house in a nice, normal little neighborhood. I guess Neil Mason's neighbors don't know he's psychic." "Or don't care," Tucker said. "If they know, they care," Sarah said out of bitter experience. The Jeep was parked across the street and half a block down, where they could look at the house without attracting undue attention. The neighborhood was quiet on this Wednesday morning, and so far they had seen no sign of life at Neil Mason's house. "Anything?" Tucker asked, even more wary after their tense standoff of the night before. Sarah wanted to snap at him to stop pushing her, but she was all too aware that this time he was right to do so. She studied the rather plain but pleasant two-story house and hesitantly tried to listen to what her senses might attempt to tell her. She felt odd. The pressure she had been so conscious of was all but gone, only a whisper remaining. And what she heard was only a whisper, so quiet and distant that focusing on it was like straining to hear someone breathing on the other side of a vast room. He knows. He knows. He knows you're coming. He knows what they want of you. He has the answers you need. He knows. He knows. Sarah was hardly aware of speaking aloud. Knows what? The whisper faded to silence, and Sarah turned her head to meet Tucker's guarded gaze. He knows you're coming. Is he on our side or with them? I don't know. After a moment, Tucker nodded. He opened the storage compartment between the Jeep's bucket seats, took out his automatic, and leaned forward to place it inside his belt at the small of his back. His jacket covered the gun so that its presence was hidden. Okay, let's go find out. Sarah was reluctant to leave the vehicle, where there was at least the illusion of safety, but she knew they had no choice. She got out and walked with Tucker across the street, all the way across and up the walkway. She tried to listen, but heard nothing. She was dimly surprised when they reached the porch that Tucker had to ring the bell. It bothered her somehow, though the feeling was no more than vague disturbance. The man who opened the door was big. That was the first impression. Easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders to match, he had the appearance of a man of immense physical strength, even though approaching middle age had given him a belly that his belt rode beneath, and the fleshy look of indulgence around the once clean jawline of his rugged face. The second impression Sarah got was that he wasn't nearly as happy to see them as his smile indicated. "Hello." His eyes tracked past Tucker and fixed on Sarah. They were blue and very bright. "Hello, Sarah." "Hello, Neil." Sarah drew a breath and added, "I recognize you." "Yes, of course you do," he said matter-of-factly. He stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in. Tucker caught Sarah's arm when she would have moved forward. "Recognize him?" She nodded. "Bits and pieces of my vision keep coming back to me. There were faces. He is one of the faces I saw." Without letting go of her arm, Tucker looked narrow-eyed at Mason, who stood patiently, smiling, waiting for them to come in. "Do you trust him, Sarah?" Her smile reminded him oddly of Mason's, the tolerant amusement of a parent for a child. He didn't like it. "Of course not, Tucker." "Then we'll find someone else." "It's all right," she said. "We're safe here, for now." Tucker released her arm when she started forward again. He didn't like this. All his instincts were screaming at him, but he followed her into the house nevertheless. In this situation, he felt he had to defer to Sarah to accept her lead. She was a psychic, not him. Still, he was uneasily aware that her belief in fate was strong enough to place them both in danger. Sarah was, he thought, perfectly capable of walking into a house she knew was dangerous only because she was utterly sure fate intended her to be there. That was one reason he continued to try to convince her that her choices could determine her own future, though he didn't flatter himself that he'd made much headway. Sarah's blind spot was her belief in destiny, and until she could see past that, she was so vulnerable it was terrifying. So Tucker walked into Neil Mason's house with all his senses wide open, as alert to possible danger as he'd ever been in his life. Even so, the first few minutes seemed to be designed to put him at ease. Mason showed them into a pleasant living room and invited them to sit down, then went away briskly to fetch coffee. Music played softly in the background, unobtrusive but soothing. A fire crackled brightly in the rock fireplace, dispelling the chill of the morning. Here at the end of September, it was all very pleasant, very ordinary. It made Tucker extremely wary. "If you don't trust him," he said to Sarah, "then why are we here? There are other psychics we can try, including 2 more right here in Syracuse." He stood near the leather couch, watching her move restlessly around the room. Sarah paused to scan the titles of some books on shelves near the fireplace and answered him in an absent tone. "It's important that we talk to him." "Why?" "Because he knows." Tucker drew a breath and held on to his patience. He thought that Sarah was being deliberately vague and uninformative, and it bothered him. She claimed that trust was not an issue with them, yet ever since the lake he'd had the feeling that she knew more about this situation than she was willing to say. If it wasn't a lack of trust that kept her silent, then what? "Knows what, Sarah? You said he knew we were coming here. Is that all?" "No." She moved back to the fireplace and looked at the flames for a moment, then lifted her gaze to meet his. "He knows why they're after me." Tucker refused to get too excited. "Will he tell us?" She tilted her head a little as though listening to a distant voice. "I don't know. Probably not." Her reply was matter of fact. "And you still don't know if he's with the other side?" "No, but leave this to me, Tucker. I have to handle him my own way. It's important." Before Tucker could say anything else, Mason returned with the tray and the opportunity was lost. But Sarah had told him nothing to reassure him, so Tucker refused coffee and remained on his feet when Sarah came over to sit on a chair across from the couch. He moved to where she had been standing at the fireplace and turned his back to the flames, so he could keep an eye on Mason as well as have a clear view of the door and windows. "He's very cautious," Mason said to Sarah, handing her a cup of coffee and sitting down on the couch. He has reason to be. We both do." "I imagine so, but I'm harmless. You might reassure him of that." Sarah smiled. "Today he's a guard, and a guard should always be wary." Tucker elected to remain silent, as much as he disliked being discussed as though he'd left the room. He leaned his shoulders back against the mantel, crossed his arms, and watched them. And within a very few minutes it occurred to him that what he was seeing was a performance where each word and gesture was both meticulous and deliberate. A dance where each knew the steps and the music, and where only one would remain standing when it was all over. How did you choose me? Mason sipped his coffee. Sarah set her cup on the coffee table untasted. We have a list of surviving psychics in this general area. You were at the top. Mason smiled at her, that curiously tolerant smile of a parent for a child, a master for a neophyte. Then you didn't hear me calling to you? No, Sarah appeared undisturbed by this. Was I supposed to? Well, if your abilities are genuine, I would have thought. However, it's no matter. You're here, where you were supposed to be. This time Tucker had to bite his tongue to remain silent. Was I supposed to be here? Sarah was innocently surprised. Mason's smile widened. Of course, you must know that. The visions and dreams, the voices in your head, they must have told you. Destiny, Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. So those are the voices I should listen to? The ones whispering that what must be is? Sober now, Mason nodded. Those are the truest voices, Sarah. It's why we hear them the clearest. Then I can change nothing I foresee. He hesitated, those bright blue eyes searching her face. Then he shrugged almost offhandedly. There is a difference between prediction and prophecy. When you see what is fated to happen, it will. No matter what you or anyone does to try and change it, that is prophecy. But you may also see a possible outcome in a given situation, and that may be influenced by the actions and choices of yourself and those around you. That is prediction. How can I tell the difference? With practice, they feel different. Sarah didn't appear to find that response inadequate. She merely nodded and changed the subject abruptly. So which is of the greatest value, prediction or prophecy? For the first time, Mason seemed caught off guard. I don't understand, Sarah. Of course you do, Sarah smiled. It's a simple question with a very simple answer. Why are my abilities important, Neil? Because I can make predictions or prophecies? His smile was gone and his eyes were not nearly so bright, but he replied readily enough. Each has its own sort of value. And they have a use for both? Mason leaned back in his chair suddenly, and Tucker had the distinct feeling it was because he needed to put distance between himself and Sarah. And there was now something wary in his eyes. They? Who are you talking about, Sarah? The other side? Her voice was casual, almost indifferent. Other side? You talk as if there's a battle going on. Isn't there? Isn't it very simply a battle between good and evil? Mason frowned. Nothing is simple, and nothing is purely good or purely bad. I think some things are simple, some truths. For instance, he was a bit impatient now. For instance, the truth that children abducted from their families is an evil thing. Wouldn't you agree with that? I suppose so. And the truth that anything done to protect them, anything at all, is a good thing. Slowly, Mason said there are always limits. In protecting children, I don't think so. Life always gives us limits, he insisted. We can only do so much, be responsible for so much. So where do we draw the line? She looked at Mason with an unblinking intensity that disturbed Tucker, and he was standing several feet away. He could only imagine how fierce those two dark eyes appeared to Mason. But the older man didn't flinch or look away from her. What do you mean? I mean, when do we decide we've done enough? When we've saved one child? Two? All of them? When we've defeated the people who take them? Shouldn't we leave that to the police, he suggested. They're the best equipped to deal with crimes, not crimes against humanity. Mason smiled. Is that what we're talking about? Oh, I'd say so. Children abducted, disappearing, never to return. Adults killed, or supposedly killed, because what they can do is important to someone. So they're taken away from their homes and families, from the people who love them, from their lives. Taken? Taken where? You tell me. I? He laughed quietly. How would I know? Because you were taken. Once. Her head tilted to one side in that listening posture. A long time ago, I think. Tucker felt his fingers close over the gun at the small of his back before he was even aware of moving. But he remained still, gripping the pistol but not drawing it. His eyes never left Mason's slowly whitening face. Mason drew a breath as if he needed one, then said lightly, I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah. Yes, you do. What is it they want you to do to me, Neil? Why are you trying so hard to crawl inside my head? Tucker glanced at her quickly, realizing for the first time that something else had been going on far beneath, or above the level of his own awareness. Something deadly. Sarah's face was as pale as Mason's and held the taut look of someone concentrating intensely, or someone in pain. I only want to help you, Sarah, Mason said softly. You want to help them. You have to help them. I don't know who you're talking about. Them, the other side. There is no mysterious enemy, Sarah. Do you hear me? No battle, just your imagination, your fears, your inexperience. Stop it, Tucker said. Neither of them looked at him. In a gentle tone, Mason said, I can help you. I can teach you how to use your abilities, how to protect yourself. I'm protecting myself now. Her voice was strained but steady. But look what it's taking out of you. I can show you a better way, Sarah. I can make it less painful for you. Is that what they taught you? What does it matter who taught me? I can teach you. I can make the pain go away. And keep me alive? Of course. And what's the price, Neil? What did you sell them to keep yourself alive? Isn't life worth any price? No, not any price. That's what you think now, but one day, soon, you'll discover you're wrong. Life is worth whatever you have to pay for it, Sarah. Life is worth any price. What did it cost you? He smiled suddenly. What if I said my soul? Then I'd say you paid too much, she whispered. I said, stop it. Tucker crossed to Sarah's chair in 2 long steps and grasped her arm. Holding the pistol, pointed at Mason with his other hand. Sarah, we're leaving. She rose to her feet readily enough, but her gaze remained locked with Mason's, and she was trembling. In a conversational tone, Mason said, go on running if you have to. But it's no use, Sarah, you know that. They'll win. They always win. You mean the mysterious enemy that doesn't exist? Her voice was still only a whisper. His mouth twisted. Yeah, them. I'm sorry, she said. Mason looked away suddenly. So am I. Oh, put the gun away, Mackenzie. You have nothing to fear from me. Go on, get her out of here. Tucker got her out of there, but he didn't take Mason's word for it that he was no threat, keeping the gun in hand until he and Sarah safely reached the street. He was wary, even then, half expecting long black cars to be waiting for them out there. But the neighborhood looked as quiet as before. He put Sarah in the passenger seat of the Jeep, one glance at her face telling him that she was in bad shape. She was so pale that her skin had a bluish cast, and her 2 dark eyes were enormous and unseeing, the pupils so dilated that only a rim of gold showed around them. He got a blanket from the back seat and covered her because she was shaking so violently. Then quickly got in the driver's seat and got the engine and heat going. He also didn't waste any time in driving away from Mason's house. "Sarah, you all right?" She didn't move, didn't look at him. "Sarah, goddammit, say something or I'm taking you straight to the nearest hospital." As if the effort demanded was almost too much, she turned her head and looked at him then, and her voice was whispery when she said, "They couldn't help me. The doctors. They wouldn't know what was wrong. I just need to rest, sleep. I'll be fine after I sleep." He wasn't so sure about that, but in any case he had to ask, what the hell went on back there? It was a skirmish. A skirmish? Jesus, Sarah. Just a skirmish, she insisted warily. He wasn't even one of them, really. He was a tool they tried to use against me, a pale echo of what they are. And even so, as ineffective as he is compared to them, look what it did to me to fight him. Look what it cost me just to hold my own with one of their tools. "It was your first skirmish," he reminded her. "You'll be better at it next time." A little sound escaped Sarah, not a laugh or a cry, but something in between. "No, I won't. I can't do that again." "Sarah, I can't. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it does to me." Tucker was beginning to understand, but nevertheless said, "What was all that about kids?" "I wanted to find out if he knew," she murmured. "Knew what?" "That they'd taken another child early this morning." "How do you know?" Starkly, her voice full of horror, Sarah said, "I heard him scream in my mind." Tucker nearly pulled off the road, every instinct urging him to put his arms around Sarah and offer some kind of comfort, but he kept driving. For one thing, something in her posture warned him that right now she didn't want to be touched by anyone. And since she had kept him from this knowledge of another abducted child, he was even more sure that she especially didn't want to be touched by him. But he could and did change the subject to what he thought was a lesser horror. "You said that Mason was trying to get into your head. Why?" "To convert me, to try to make me think the way they want me to." "Which is that I can't fight them and win, that they'll always be stronger, that I already belong to them, that I'm destined to lose." Tucker glanced at her quickly, then turned his attention back to the road ahead of them, but he failed. "He didn't get inside my head." "Did you get inside his?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, "Not enough to help us." Tucker sent her another glance, this one a bit hard. "More secrets?" "What are you not telling me?" "Nothing that matters." "On a need-to-know basis, I think I need to know." Again, she was silent, minutes passing before she finally said in a curiously hollow voice, "It only matters to me. I know something I didn't know before. I know what it will cost me to survive if they get their hands on me. And it's not a price I want to pay." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I looked inside Mason's head, inside him, and there was nothing there. I don't..." He was telling the truth, Tucker. He did pay a high price for his life. He paid with his soul. Neil Mason sat there on the couch for some time after Gallagher and Mackenzie left and gazed at nothing. He was a little tired, more than a little, if the truth be told. He lifted one hand, holding it out in front of him, and dispassionately watched it shake. "I'm getting too old for this. Hell, I was always too old for this." His hand fell to rest on his thigh, and he looked around the living room almost curiously. Had it been worth it? Funny that he hadn't asked himself before. Hadn't been able to, maybe. Afraid of the answer, probably. The phone rang and Mason rose to get the portable from its place out in the hall. Hello? Idly, he walked back into the living room. Report. That cool, incongruously pleasant voice had the usual effect of removing the solid bone and cartilage from his knees, and Mason sat down abruptly in the chair Sarah Gallagher had occupied. Gosh, how did I let him do this to me? I have nothing to report, he said formally. Then you have something to explain? She's stronger than I was told, much stronger. Maybe stronger than you knew, you son of a bitch. And smarter. She managed to block me very effectively. And the drug? She never touched the coffee. You should have put it in something else. Mason smiled, glad he was not visible to the other man. When I offered coffee, she accepted, took the cup, and set it down. She wouldn't have tasted anything I gave her. What made her suspicious of you? Oh, I don't know. Unless it was the fact that her abilities are just about the best I've ever encountered. Lots of raw talent there. There was a short silence. Mason waited patiently. I see. Is she aware of her own potential? I'd say not. Still scared of it. And that says something, you know. Even scared, she did pretty damn good. When she gets her feet under her, she won't be a tool you can use. She'll be a weapon, if that is she's brought over by then. And how long do you estimate we have before she gets her feet under her? Hard to say. If the status remains quo, maybe a week or two. If you keep her rattled and off balance, maybe longer. On the other hand, she's awfully close to the edge now. Push her the wrong way and that weapon won't be yours, it'll be hers, and she'll be out of your reach for good. There was a soft click and then the dial tone. Mason turned off his portable phone and set it on the coffee table. Half to himself, he muttered, "Don't ask if you don't want to know." Then he sat there looking absently around his pleasant living room and waited for them to come for him. A tool may fail even in the hand of a master, Varden said. Duran turned from the window and gave him a look that warned him not to bother sucking up, but all he said was, "Bring Mason in." "Yes, sir." Not making a second mistake, Varden left. She had gone to sleep with the suddenness of an exhausted child just moments after telling him that Mason had sold his soul for life, and Tucker let her sleep. He needed to concentrate on getting them out of Syracuse, and he needed to think. There was a lot to think about, not the least of which was Sarah's clearly expanding abilities. She'd begun by having visions of the future, but unlike any precognitive psychic Tucker had ever heard of, she was also, at the very least, telepathic to some extent. And that was becoming more obvious as time passed. Last night she'd accused him of failing to keep his promises and had cited a broken promise to Lydia, which she could only have known by looking into his own mind telepathically, or reaching across distance and possibly time to look into Lydia's mind, as she appeared to do once before. Lydia, Jesus Christ. He pushed that away, concentrating on what Sarah had done this morning. She had, she said, heard the mental scream of a child being abducted, and she had managed to hide her shock and distress from him. And as for Neil Mason, she had somehow managed to block his efforts to influence her telepathically, and she had looked inside him to find nothing. He did pay a high price for life. He paid with his soul. Tucker hoped she hadn't meant that literally. He really hoped so. He wasn't at all sure. He believed that some evil entity could capture a soul, or even take one in payment for anything. No, surely she hadn't meant it literally. She'd meant it the way anyone would, using the phrase as a yardstick to measure how badly someone could want something. Mason willing to sell his soul for life meant simply that he was willing to give up just about everything else that mattered to him in order to live. That was what she'd meant. Except that Tucker had a crawly feeling it wasn't, because the look on Sarah's face when she'd said it wasn't a price she was willing to pay. When she said it wasn't a price she was willing to pay, it spoke of something truly terrible, more than the loss of possessions or even a way of life, the loss of a soul, literally the loss of a soul, which means what? That we're fighting the devil? No, there was nothing supernatural about the other side. So far, nothing that had been done by them could not be explained logically and rationally. In fact, everything he found out about this conspiracy, with the exception of its bizarre focus on psychics, smacked of all too human violence and felonious intentions rather than mystical behavior. Sure, the other side was, or appeared to be, all around them, though that perception was probably more paranoid than real. And they did seem to have vast, even limitless resources. But Tucker was still convinced that what lay at the heart of this conspiracy was a very ordinary and even unimaginative, parentheses, if presently inexplicable, close parentheses, plan to profit in some way, to gain something, power perhaps. Even as those thoughts took form in his mind, Tucker was reminded of crossing a graveyard at night as a young boy, whistling as boys would to prove to himself there was nothing wrong, not looking to the left or the right, and surely to God not looking back, but only straight ahead, marching briskly, because there was nothing hiding in the graveyard, nothing about to jump out at him from behind a headstone. Nothing was going to get him. Half-consciously, Tucker turned up the Jeep's heater. They had been on the road about an hour when Sarah stirred and opened her eyes drowsily. Tucker had been waiting for her to wake and spoke immediately, hoping to use the unexpectedness of the question to tap into that odd well of knowledge she couldn't seem to reach into deliberately, or at least didn't admit she could. "Sarah, where are we going?" She murmured. "Where are we going?" "Holcomb. It's a little town northwest of Bangor." The answer surprised him, but he tried to keep his voice calm and without any particular inflection. "Why, there?" "Because that's where it ended." "Ended? Past tense?" Sarah's eyes opened wider and she turned her head to look at him. For a moment she looked a little lost and more than a little puzzled, the pupils of her eyes wide like a cat's in the dark, as they always seemed to be now. Then she shrugged and half closed her eyes. "I don't know what I mean. A slip of the tongue, probably." Tucker didn't think so. Her two dark eyes were veiled against him, and her voice held an evasive note. He wanted to push, to insist that she tell him whatever it was she was holding back, but he couldn't quite bring himself to, not now. She was still exhausted, strained, and even in the delicate bones of her face was the finely honed look of unspeakable stress and pressure. He was afraid that if he pushed her now, forced her now, she would simply break. So he forced himself to be patient for now. "But it is Holcomb we're headed for?" Yes, I think so." Tucker thought about it, then shook his head. "The only city of any size roughly between here and Bangor is Portland." "But that's on the coast." "Yeah, but from there it'll be less than 150 miles to Bangor, We can be in Portland in a few hours, spend the night there, then go on to Holcomb tomorrow. On the last day of September, Sarah said. We're safer in large cities, and you're in no shape to drive straight through to Bangor. I'm fine. No, you're not. You need to sleep about 12 hours. I don't want to sleep that long. It wouldn't help anyway. He glanced at her, then turned his gaze forward once again. All right, but you do need to rest, and we need to decide if we want to look up another psychic. There are 3 on the list who presently live in Portland. I don't know. Her voice was evasive again. We're running out of time. Maybe we should risk spending a few extra hours in Portland, Sarah. Visit at least one more psychic. If we go on to Holcomb with no idea of what to expect there. What if the next psychic is another of their tools? What if they all are? That hadn't occurred to Tucker, and he felt a chill. They can't all be on the other side, surely. No? Sarah closed her eyes again and added softly, but what if they are, Tucker? What if they are?